we completed 17-24. We calculated the physical units. We calculated the equivalent units. That was step 1 for physical units. Step 2 for the equivalent units. We are going to continue by working with cost information for this problem now. So we are actually moving on to problem 17-25, which is a continuation of what we just did, still using the weighted average method. We are to summarize the total cost to account for. We are to calculate the cost per equivalent unit for direct materials and for conversion. And then we are to assign costs to the units completed and transferred out and units in ending work in process. So we have a few more steps to do for this problem. Step 3 will be figuring out total units, total costs to account for. Step 4 will be a cost per equivalent unit. And step 5 will be assigning costs to those units that were completed and transferred and those units that are still in ending work in process. So let's go to our information here. And we're moving on to 17-25. So step 3, we will deal with cost information. So let's start with work in process in the beginning. And that's given. Let me just jot down some information and then we'll look at what's given. We'll look at costs that were added in the current period, which is also given. And these will be our total costs to account for. So we've got total production costs. We also have direct material and we have conversion, just like we did earlier. So let's get started. Work in process. Let's go back to the information we were given. We have $459,888 for materials. We've got $142,570 for conversion. These were the costs that were added. So let me just take those numbers and slate them in here. $459,888, $142,570. Costs that were added, your book said $3,237. Let me restate that. $3,237,000, and that belongs right over here. $1,916,000 for conversion. So those were simply copied right from your book. Let me add our numbers to get some totals. So beginning work in process, we have $602,458. We added an additional $5,153,000 worth of costs. So altogether, we have a total of $5,755,458 worth of production costs. If you break them up for direct materials, $3,696,888. For conversion, $2,058,570. So that's step 3, figuring out total costs to account for. And in the end, this is going to be the number that we're going to tie back into. So we've accomplished step 3, figuring out the total costs. Now let's figure out a cost per equivalent unit. And this is where we're going to use what we did in problem 24 rather. These numbers here, which I will highlight for us. These numbers here, which I will highlight for us. And step 4 is really putting the information together. So I'll copy down here my total cost to account for. And I'm only going to deal with the numbers, these two numbers. I'm not going to be touching this right now because I really want to work with equivalent units. So I will copy for direct materials. I'll take $3,696,888. And if I want to figure out a cost per equivalent unit, I will divide by equivalent units. And this is where we draw from the earlier problem. So 578 equivalent units, and I am dividing these two numbers. So cost per equivalent unit, and I'll just write EU for equivalent unit. If I take $3,696,888 and I divide by 578 units, I will get $6,396. I'll do the same thing for conversion costs. So the costs are $2,058,570. The equivalent units, 514 equivalent units. Again, I do the dividing, and I get $4,005 per equivalent unit. Let me just make these a little fancy. So each finished unit, equivalent to a finished unit, each finished unit costs $6,396 with respect to material and $4,005 with respect to conversion costs. So that takes us through step 3 and step 4. We've got one more step to do. Assign costs to the units completed, which were also transferred out. And when they say transferred out, we're moving from work in process to finished goods. We also have units sitting in ending inventory. So that will be our next step. Step 5. Starting over here, I am going to work with my cost per equivalent unit, and I'm also going to work with what I did earlier on, right over here. Let me show you the full picture, but this is what we need right now. Completed during May and ending work in process, and we are focusing on these numbers right over here. So there were 450 completed units. They're complete, so we've got all the equivalent units of material and all of the equivalent units of conversion. So we're dealing with 450 equivalent units. Each equivalent unit is costing $6,396 for material and $4,005 for conversion. So for step 5, if I take, and I guess I will just take some notes over here, $450, no, I'm 450 equivalent units times 6,000 $396. That gives me the number that I will need to put in this box here. So let's do the math. 450 units times 6,396. It gives me $2,878,200. Right over here, if I take 450 equivalent units times $4,005, it gives me just clean it up. $1,802,250. So again, that was 450 equivalent units times $4,005, and that gave me $1,802,250. What this represents is the cost of the units completed and transferred out. 450 units. We also want to find out work in process at the end of the month. So we will go back up here. We had 160 units, but in terms of equivalent units, 128 equivalent units for materials, 64 equivalent units for conversion. And we're going to use the same dollars that we figured out over here, cost per equivalent unit. So I will take 128 equivalent units times 6,396 to give me $818,688 for that work in process. And again, that's for 120 equivalent units. Let me put down units so you know what I'm referring to. And this one was for 450 units. Right over here, I will take 64 equivalent units. I will multiply it by the same $4,005 to get $256,320. So again, just to write out the work, it's 128 equivalent units times 6,396. That gave me 818,688. 120, actually 64 equivalent units times 4,005, and that gave me 256,320. Add these together, total them up, total up the conversion, and we now have total costs to account for. So for my totals, I have for $4,680,450. These are the costs of those goods that were completed and transferred. And let me indicate clearly that we're dealing with dollars. I'll do the same thing for work in process. So I added up these two numbers. All in all, $5,755,458 worth of costs. And that ties back to this number here, total cost to account for. And then we finished step 5. So just to do a quick recap, I'll do a quick recap of the whole thing. Step 1 was to deal with your physical units. Step 2 was to figure out equivalent units. Step 3 was to figure out your total cost to account for in terms of material and in terms of conversion. Step 4 was to figure out cost per equivalent unit. So over here we're dealing with total, and over here we're dealing with a unit cost. I'll highlight that. Total cost. And this one here, unit cost. And the reason why I needed to figure out unit cost is I've got my equivalent units here, equivalent units here. One is for materials, one is for conversion. And if I take these numbers here, these numbers here, multiply them out. Actually, sorry, I'll restate that. If I take these numbers and multiply them by my equivalent cost per equivalent unit, I can't use the totals. I've got to use these numbers here. I carried these down. I did my work right over here to show you. And now I have figured out how much was completed and transferred and how much is still sitting in work in process. And we are finished with doing process costing using the weighted average method.